G'day, my name is Fuzzy and we're here to talk about why is Australia's electricity so expensive. Okay, now there are a couple of reasons for this. The first and biggest reason by far is privatisation. Now, back in the 80s when I started working in the electrical field, yeah, that's me just there. That's in the 80s, I'm about 17 or 18 there, and you can tell it's the 80s because, dude, look at all the mullets. But anyway, back when I started working in the 80s, Australia had the cheapest electricity in the OECD. And that was generally because all of our electrical infrastructure, all our generators, all our transmission lines, and all our retail services were all owned by the state government. That meant that they could charge what it cost to make the electricity, what it cost to distribute it, and what it cost to bill you, plus a little bit of profit for the state government. But that was all they charged. That was it. Was all good like that. And that worked fantastically up until in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a company called Enron in the United States, which was making huge amounts of money by working like a stock market for electricity. So a lot of our politicians said, hey, we need to do this. This is going to make a lot of money for a lot of people, generally white men. So they've decided that they were going to privatize our electrical grids and then split them up into three different sections, which is the generators, the transmitters, and the retail section. So that's the departments or the places where they actually generate the electricity, and then the transmitters, which is your transmission lines and your transformers, your poles and wires basically, and then your retail, which are the people that send you the bills. So they've broken this all up, and that actually was maybe not the greatest idea anybody has ever done, but I can't think of any actual reason why to do it. Maybe they paid off some state debt doing it. I really don't know. But so what that did was it left a gap. So what the government did was it made a company called the AEMO, the Australian Electrical Market Operator. So what that does now is it's like a middleman. It serves no purpose except to jack up the price of electricity. So when the generators generate it, they need to sell it to the transmitters. And that way, the AEMO is in the middle there. So instead of the generators going, look, it's costing us this much to make it, this much to pay off our infrastructure, and this much to pay off wages, and we want a bit of profit, that's all out the window. What it is now, the more people want it, the more you can actually get for your electricity. What this did was it actually massively jacked up the price of wholesale electricity in this country, because now what happens is, when the demand goes up, companies can actually lower the amount of electricity they're producing, which means the price skyrockets. It's really open to manipulation. It's not the greatest idea ever, but hey, that is what they've done. So now when they actually talk about, wholesale electricity prices have gone up so much in the last 10 years or 15 years, the actual price of making electricity has actually dropped in real terms. Wind farms, solar farms produce electricity much cheaper than a coal-fired power station can, but because it's no longer being sold directly to the market, it's going through the AEMO, what's happening is the price actually gets artificially jacked up. So that's where the wholesale costs have actually increased. The second reason it's gone up a lot, which is once again because of privatization, is transmission costs. Now what the AEMO does is it says, okay, you transmission company with all your poles and wires, you can charge, we'll say about 6 or 7% of what your entire infrastructure is worth to all your customers. You can divide that equally amongst them, and that will make up your costs. Now, that sounds like a reasonable idea, but when you actually look at it, the way I look at it is the companies which own the transmission lines and transformers get to value themselves. So they actually look and go, look, all our infrastructure is worth this much, so we'll charge 6% of what we think it's worth. Now, just to give you an idea of how you can play that system, if I compare Australia to the United States. Now, Australia, we have about 7% of the population of the United States, and we use about 7% of the electricity of the United States. And when it comes to transmission lines, poles, and transformers, we actually have about 10% as much as the United States does, because we're a very big country, same as they are. So consider those to like 7% of the population, 7% of the actual consumption, about 10% of the infrastructure. So if you add up all of the transmitters, what they've added up their costs at, they say our infrastructure is worth about 75% of what United States' infrastructure is worth, which, I don't know, I kind of think is a scam, but I'm not in government, I can't say anything about that. So that's where the big jump in transmission costs have come from. The privatisation of the transmission companies, and therefore the massive, massive overvaluation, over self-invaluation of the value of their assets, and then they pass that cost on to the consumers. There is one notable exception in this, which is Queensland, where you've got Ergon and Energex, which are still state-owned, but they do the exact same. They overvalue themselves, and then they go to the AEMO and say, can we charge this much? Yeah, whatever they say, and then that's charged to the people of Queensland. So I don't know, maybe if you live in Queensland, maybe if you write to your local state politician and say, look, I actually think the government assets should be used for the good of the people of the state and not for raising money for the state, massive amounts of money, I just have to underline there, yeah, maybe things will change, but I really, really, really can't see it. There are a few other reasons as well. In Australia, we live in a very, very large country and we pay high wages, so we actually have to have a lot of infrastructure to transport the electricity between where it's generated and where people live, but that really hasn't changed that much in the last 20 or 30 years. Our country's just as big, our wages are just as high. There are also some losses when you're transmitting electricity long distances, which make our electricity a little bit more expensive. We've got things like solar rebates in some states, which is about 10% of the wholesale cost is in a solar rebate, which works out to 1 cent per kilowatt hour, give or take. So you're looking about 2 to 4% of your actual bill is solar rebates in some states. And the last thing that makes our electricity look so expensive is the way that we actually compare it to the rest of the world. What we do is we take our price per kilowatt hour in Australian cents, we convert that into US cents, and then we compare that to the rest of the world where their currency has been converted into US cents. But if you were to compare what it costs per kilowatt hour compared to our average wage or even our minimum wage, that actually pushes the price of electricity way, way down. And if we compared it like that, how long does it take you to earn a kilowatt hour? You would find that Australia would be easily in the bottom 10%. So that would actually make our electricity look very, very cheap. But the big thing is, well, is there anything we can do about it? We've made a mess. Can we get out of it? Well, yeah, we can pretty easily, actually, if people who make the decisions really want to. In Australia, we've got something called compulsory acquisition, which is, say you own a house or a factory or a shop or a farm, and the government wants to build a road where that is. They will get your property valued, and then they will offer you the money, and you will have no choice. You will have to sell, and then the government can build a road or an airport or whatever it thinks is going to be for the best use of the community. Well, that's great, but I would argue that halving the electricity costs of every person and every company in this country would be in the public interest. So we could compulsory buy back all our generators, our transmitters, and our retail services. Reality is that might have some problems, and it's not going to happen because, well, basically these people will fight hook, line, and sinker to keep their money. So we could probably use compulsory acquisition to buy the transmission and the retail back. That would help. That would cut prices by about 20%, 30%. Failing that, we could just get rid of the AEMO. Get rid of it, scrap it all together, and then we would tell the transmission companies, no, your transmission infrastructure is worth this much. You are going to get this much payment every year that you can charge people. And we could go to the generation companies and say, look, okay, cool. In the middle of the night, we'll pay you this much for green energy, this much for dirty energy. In high peaks of demand, we'll pay you this much and this much. And that would give absolute certainty to the companies how much electricity they can sell and how much money they can make, and that would help investment and everybody would be happy, except for the people that make the money out of the AEMO, but that's another story. So yep, that's a very, very quick outline of why electricity is so expensive here. I'll actually have to do a couple of follow-up videos because there are a couple of things I've just brushed over which are really, really complicated, but that's the crux of it. Can we cut electricity costs in Australia? Yeah, really, quite easily. Why is it so expensive? Because the government privatised it. Simple as that. No issues, no argument. I'm not going to say which government privatised everything. You can look that up yourself. But anyway, yeah. So that's it. My name's Fuzzy Bunny Hugs. I hope you've all enjoyed listening to this, and I'll do a follow-up video to explain a couple other things as soon as I can.